When it comes down to it, does anything truly beat a simple crisp Pilsner with that timeless blend of sweet crackery malt and spicy floral hops? In my opinion, the answer is no. And as such, I heartily recommend you have a go at brewing a German Pils like this one. So in this video, I'm going to be going through the recipe for this particular beer and some general tips for brewing German Pils successfully. But before we start, if you haven't already, please jump on the subscribe and like buttons for the channel and check out the description for links to my other social channels and a variety of ways that you can support the channel through affiliate links and things like that. Now let's start off by having a look at the German Pils style. This beer was brewed for a competition entry, so it was important to me that it was a classic example and ticked all the boxes as far as the BJCP guidelines went. To that end, I'd like to give a shout out to Mean Brews on YouTube, whose video on this style was very helpful to me. On his videos, he aggregates recipes from competition winning beers to give a suggested recipe for a kind of best case scenario recipe for each particular style that he looks at. Apart from changing the malt, the hops and the yeast, I did stick to his recipe to the letter, but joking aside, the recipes that he does provide can give you a really good framework for competition beers, particularly where you want to really hit all of the guidelines and details that BJCP judges will be looking for, because obviously they're based on beers that have done well in those sorts of competitions. So do go and check Mean Brews out on the link that will be in the description and on the screen at the moment. So back to those guidelines specifically. Category 5D German Pils, overall impression, a pale, dry, bitter German lager featuring a prominent hop aroma, crisp, clean and refreshing, showing a brilliant gold colour with excellent head retention. If we look at the vital statistics for this, we're looking for an ABV of between 4.4 and 5.2%. Original gravity somewhere between 1044 and 1050. Final gravity somewhere between 1008 and 1013. And your IBU range between 22 and 40 IBUs. Colour should be very light, as you would expect, with an EBC range between 4 and 8. So the emphasis in these guidelines really does push the hoppy aroma and flavour as a characteristic, and I think that's one of the most important things to bear in mind when you are brewing this style. Whenever you're looking at BJCP guidelines, I'd recommend you try and find the characteristics which are emphasised throughout the guidelines for that style, and anything which is given as kind of moderate to high or moderately high, that kind of thing, is going to be something that really needs to be in that beer prominently. With this one, bitterness and hop aroma and flavour are mentioned specifically on numerous occasions with those descriptors. So that's kind of the key takeaways for me on that one, as well as the obvious ones like clarity and clean fermentation character, which you would want with any lager like this. So for my beer, I leaned towards the top end with some of those stats and went with target figures of 5% ABV, 1049 original gravity, 1011 final gravity. That's more to do with the yeast that was chosen in this case as to where that would land. Obviously the mashing temperature will affect that as well. EBC colour rating of 5.5 and my IBUs just shy of the top of the range for style at 39 IBUs. That gives you a Bugu ratio of 0.8. So again, relatively prominent kind of bitterness with that kind of level. And this is for a 20 litre batch working at 75% brew house efficiency. You can see a link for the full Brewfather recipe in the description, so go and check that out if you want to get a copy of that. So looking at the grain bill, we've got 3 kilograms of floor malted Bohemian Pilsner. Really love that malt. Fantastic malt from Wehrmann, that one. And I've just supported that with a little bit of crisp German Pilsner. So I've got 1.2 kilos of German Pilsner in there. The crisp Pilsner malt seems to give you a little bit of a more dry, kind of crackery, almost grainy flavour in there, and I felt that would just add a little bit to the kind of nice, sweet honey, breaded honey kind of flavour that I get from the floor malted Bohemian Pilsner. And there's 200 grams of dextrin malt in there. You don't have to have anything other than Pilsner malt in these sorts of recipes, but I always like to add a little bit of dextrin malt in there just to help, theoretically help out with head retention and maybe add a little bit of body in there, and that only works out to about 4.6% of the total grist. So that would be mashed at 65 degrees Celsius. You want to be keeping your mash temperatures pretty low in order to aid the dry kind of crisp finish of the beer. Hopping wise, I went with Hersbrucker and Tettnang. So Hersbrucker for that kind of floral, classic kind of noble hop character that you get from the Hallertau varieties, and Tettnang because I like the slightly more prominent kind of spiciness that you can get from that hop. And I thought that those two would work quite well together. I really wanted to use Tettnang in the Pilsner because I wanted that sort of spicy bitterness to be in there as well. I did supplement Hersbrucker in the first wort edition with a little bit of Hallertau Magnum because both of those hops that I got were really low alpha acid. They were both 3% or under. So I added some high alpha Hallertau Magnum in with the 40 grams of Hersbrucker as my first wort addition in order to get the IBUs up to where I needed them to be. So it's 40 grams of Hersbrucker and 5 grams of Hallertau Magnum as a first wort addition. And then we had 18 grams of Hersbrucker at 15 minutes, 18 grams of Tettnang at 15 minutes, and then 20 grams of each of those hops again in the whirlpool at 20 minutes. So a decent quantity of hops overall and a good sized whirlpool addition to try and get some of that aroma into the beer as well. You could potentially go with a small dry hop if you want to, but most recipes won't include dry hopping in them, and you definitely wouldn't want to go too heavy if you did go down that road, because it would probably push it out of style a little bit in terms of how that affected the overall flavour and presentation of the hops. For the yeast, I went with Yeast 2206, which is their Bavarian lager strain. I hadn't used this one before. It was one of the strains, I think the second most popular strain mentioned in the video, and I use 2124, which is the Bohemian lager strain from Yeast all the time. So I thought I'd change it up a bit and use that one. That's what I went with. Built a big starter with this, so 2.3 litre starter. Can't emphasise how much a good pitch of yeast for these sorts of beers is going to be important. So if you're using wet yeast, make sure you build a good size starter and you are checking the viability of the yeast in terms of the date on the packet and all the rest of it. If you're going with dry yeast, for this sort of batch size, you almost certainly want at least 2 packets, if not more. And again, just make sure that that yeast is as fresh and healthy as possible. So with the fermentation schedule for this yeast, I started off pretty cool towards the lower end of the temperature range, and then under pressure, which I allowed to build up naturally in the Firmzilla, just gently ramped that up over the course of about 2 weeks until I got to the end of fermentation and essentially having it at a diacetyl rest temperature. From there, it was then transferred into the keg and lagered for as long as I could leave it alone. Last thing to mention on the recipe is the water profile. So starting with RO water, I built the profile back up to 66 ppm calcium, 50 ppm chloride, and 91 ppm sulfate. So it's a little bit more mineral heavy than what you would see with a lot of lager water profiles, but for German Pils, I think a little bit of extra sulfate in there just helps, again, to emphasize that bitterness. And style guidelines do talk about the style itself kind of coming about because of this difference in water characteristics between the sort of German breweries versus their Czech counterparts, and that's one of the reasons that those beers had a more bitter and kind of hop forward flavor profile to them. So how did the beer actually come out? This was entered into the BrewCon competition back in October, and it scored 40 out of 50 and took an honourable mention in its category, which I was really pleased with, considering this was kind of the first iteration of this recipe, and I'd, with some help from Mean Brews, designed the recipe from scratch for myself. So I'm really pleased with that. And now all we need to do is actually do a little bit of a taste test and evaluation of it here and now. So I have topped up the beer a little bit because the head had dropped away after me standing here chatting for about 10 minutes, but it does maintain a decent head on there, and it's got a lovely light straw, kind of golden appearance to it. really nice clarity and streaming carbonation in the glass. The head on it is quite a tight sort of frothy kind of foamy cap. Looks like a Pilsner, so appearance wise really good. On the aroma, you do get that blend of not overpowering but just sort of subtle kind of floral, noble hop aroma, kind of sweet, yeah, flowery, kind of meadow-like smell from the hops with a little bit of spice in there, and then just that kind of sweet background note of the crackery kind of Pilsner malt. As I said at the start, I don't know, I mean, it's not like the most smash you in the face aromatic kind of beer, but for me, it really is appealing. So let's dig in. So there is some initial sweetness on there. That floor malted Pils does bring that real kind of like honeyed bread flavour to this beer, similar to the Smells Lagery recipe that I did before with that malt. Really love the malt flavour from that, but there is a little bit of a drier kind of cracker bread note in there as well. So I think that blend of the two malts did help with that. I think that's something that's worth experimenting with, you know, using a couple of slightly different base malts for beers like this. But very quickly that malt flavour does give way to the hops, so you get that kind of spicy bitterness coming in. And the finish definitely has that kind of like bitter, lingering bitterness there. It's not kind of harsh or astringent, which is good. And that really kind of encourages you to go back for more. It's really drinkable because of that. It's got a nice dry finish, but I think that kind of slight sweetness from the malt does help to give it a bit of body when you're drinking it. Yeah, really kind of not rich, but quite a full kind of malty taste in there. The balance just tilts towards the hops as you drink it. So as I said, that's kind of up front, then the hops take over. You get this like floral, sweet, kind of slightly flowery flavour in there as well. I think the Tettnang does bring that extra bit of spice though to it, which I really like. And yeah, overall, it's just an absolute smasher. It's a shame that I'm stood in a garage and it's about 2 degrees in here at the minute, because this was really something I'd like to be drinking on a hot summer's day as opposed to a freezing cold November night in the UK. So need to brew some for next summer, but this will definitely be a regular on the rotation, something that I might change up the hops and try different things out with, and maybe pop it into a few more competitions as well. So let me know if you've got any other tips for brewing this kind of style, or what your you know, go-to methods and recipes are for German Pilsner. And if anyone has a go at brewing it, please let me know what you think and give me some feedback on it. So yeah, jump into the comments, let me know what's going on, and let me know if there's any other beers that you'd like me to do a video like this on. Cheers, everyone.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness, or duder, or, you know, El Duderino, if you're not into the whole brevity thing.